now, Ernie Witham, finding humor in everyday situations.
Okay, what I thought I'd do, let me bring up the second one. Okay, so these are the things I thought I'd cover tonight. And start with how I get started in writing, but then there's some important elements of humor writing that I think I should talk about. And then how I find humor in everyday situations, or how we can all find humor in everyday situations, including reading, observational humor, listening for humor, really important. Shopping for humor is one of my favorite things to do. I go shopping all the time with no intent on buying anything, just to go and see what I can find. Talk about titles and beginnings, high recognition factor, a few techniques, including the rule of threes, which you'll recognize, I'm sure, you're all writers. Something I like to tell people is to write what you don't know. We'll get into that a little bit. And then writing for the holidays. So, oh, and you probably see this photo there. This is the Millikan man at Millikan University. And I taught a class there, and I saw him sitting on the bench holding a brass book. And I thought, wow, it'd be really cool if he was holding my book. So I photoshopped my book into his hands and then sat beside him like I was giving him some instruction. Anyway, so about 1990, I went to the Santa Barbara Writers Conference for the very first time because I had finished my novel. And I thought I'd go there, find an agent, sell my book for a lot of money, become famous, buy a large estate with an ocean view, everybody's dream. But when I got to the conference, I quickly found out that I didn't really have a novel. I had the dreaded work in process, and it needed a lot of work. So I stumbled around to some other workshops. I went to poetry. I'm not a poet, found that out right away. I went to some fiction workshops, which were really good, but I wasn't quite there. And then about the third day, I stumbled into the humor workshop. And right away, I knew I'd found my people. People were reading short, punchy, funny things, and it was the kind of stuff I like to write. I didn't even know that that's what I like to write, but people were reading some funny stuff, and I put my name on the list, and finally came to me, and I was scared to death reading for the first time in the workshop, but I had a piece about my wife getting the flu, and I read it, nothing, and that's one thing about a humor workshop, right away whether it's working or not, because if people aren't laughing, it's not working. So other than fiction where, everybody's listening intently, so it wasn't really working, but I had one line that got a huge laugh. And when I finished my piece, during the comments, some lady spoke up and said, that line that got the huge laugh? And I said, yeah. She said, you should just write more lines like that. And I thought, wow, why didn't I think of that? So I took that away from that first conference. And the next year, excuse me just a minute. The next year, I went back and I had written a few new pieces, including one about home repair. And it got a lot of laughs. Everybody liked it. And the workshop leader put it in for best humor piece contest, and I won. So at that closing ceremonies, they asked me to stand up and read my piece. There were 350 people there. I was shaking in my boots. But I made it through, and I got a lot of laughs. And afterwards, people were saying, wow, you should get that published. I'm going, great. How do I do that? You guys, that's what you guys talk about. I didn't know anything about it. It's my first conference. This is my second conference now. And so they told me to contact the Santa Barbara News Press, and they gave me the name of a lady. And being naive, I called her up. Her name was Linda Bowen. And I had sent her my piece, and I called her up 2 days later and said, well, have you had a chance to read my piece yet? And you want to publish it? And no response. And this is no cell phones or email. This is before that. So I waited 2 days. I called her back again. Waited 2 days. I called her back again. I was so naive. I had no idea of what I was supposed to be doing. But so finally, she called me back. She said, "I got your messages," and I realized I've been bugging her. But she said, "Look, I've got an advertising supplement coming up about home repair, and maybe I can get it into that advertising supplement." And I thought, great. She said, "But the best I can do is $20. And I thought, wow, am I supposed to give her $20 because it's an advertising supplement? Or is she going to give me $20? And at that point, I didn't care. I just wanted to get it published. So it came out, and it was completely, as you can picture, it was completely surrounded by ads. And but it was my first real clip. I'd had a couple non-humor pieces published, but it's my first humor piece. So I called her up, and I tell students all the time, whenever you get published, thank the editor who published you. It's a real privilege, I think, to get published. And she could have said no, but she didn't. She said yes. I called her up and I thanked her. And at the same time, I said, "Can I write another piece?" And she said, "Well, I have a wedding supplement coming up. Do you have a wedding piece?" And I said, "I will have." And I wrote a funny wedding piece. And then I wrote a spring fashion from the point of view of a guy, and a couple others. And they're all in advertising supplements. And then Linda Bowen left the news press, and a new lady took over, and she didn't find me as funny. So I sent in a piece, a Father's Day piece, and she said, I can't use this, but I'll send it to the editorial department. So I didn't hear anything, And finally, the editorial editor, page editor, called me up and said, "This is funny. I'd like to run this on Father's Day and send me a photo." So I sent him a photo, and on Father's Day, on the editorial section, it came out in the whole bottom half of the front page of the editorial was my piece on Father's Day. It was a piece at the golf store on Father's Day, and they ran my photo with it. It was my first real column, and because I had the photo, people were coming up to me and they're going, "I didn't know you were a writer, and is this all true?" And I'm like, "Well, kind of." Anyway, so I did the same thing. I called John Langford, was his name. I called John Langford up. I thanked him for publishing me, and I said, "Can I write another piece?" And he said, "Well, I really don't have anybody writing holiday pieces." And he says, "So if you can write another holiday piece, I'll see what I can do." And so I wrote, I think the next piece was Halloween. I wrote a Halloween piece, then I wrote a Christmas piece, and I wrote a Valentine's Day piece, and everything was going great. And then John Langford left the paper, so to speak. And I was kind of without a position, but by then I had some clips and I could send them out. And so I was trying to get published. I contacted someone at the LA Times. They used to have a section called Laugh Lines, and it was 700 words long. And I read it for a while, and I realized that every week, there was 5 days, every week, there was the same 3 people. And then there were always 2 other people. And I figured, okay, these are freelance pieces. So I sent him a piece about Thanksgiving, getting ready for Thanksgiving. And he called me up and he said, "I can't run this at Thanksgiving, but can you make it a Christmas piece?" And I said, "Okay." So everywhere it said Thanksgiving, I put Christmas. And he published it. And at that time, I paid $300, which was a lot of money back in the early 90s. And I wrote like 6 pieces for the LA Times. And then he went on to a different paper, and I lost that gig. But by then, somebody introduced me at the Santa Barbara Writers Conference to the publisher of the Montecito Journal, and he said he'd like to start publishing me. So that's how I got started, and I've been writing now for the Montecito Journal for 23 years or something. Which leads into some of these other things that I want to talk about, because I was writing once a month when I first started, because it was a bi-weekly publication. Then they went monthly, and I was writing twice a month. Then they started another publication called the San Ynez Valley Journal. I was writing for that, so I was writing 3 times a month. And then there was a magazine I was writing for once every other month. So I was constantly looking for humor in everyday situations and trying to come up with something to write about. So anyway, that's how I got started. So here are what I think are some important elements to think about when you're writing humor. Whoops, wrong way. Truth. Humor is considered nonfiction. As some of you know, if you've written any of it, it's in the nonfiction category in the bookstores. It's, my book says nonfiction on the back. And that's because it always has a basis in truth. And people still tell stories at parties. It's always something that just happened to them. It's always true. And that's where the humor comes in. It's something that has happened. So I think a great way to start a piece is with a true statement. Like, I hate home repair. That was the first line of my humor piece that won the awards at Santa Barbara Radio. It was all about messing up home improvement projects. And my first line was, I hate home repair. Traveling can be a bit stressful. Another true statement, and I'm sure you can attest to that. June got off to not such a great start. That was the whole thing about problems I had in June. And I used to be taller. And this, which works into this photo over here, which is taken at LACMA, Los Angeles County Museum of Art. But that piece came about because I went to the doctors for annual physical, and they weigh you and they measure you. And when they measured me, they said, 5'10" and a half. And I said, no way. I said, I'm 5'11 3/4. I always have been. And checked it again. Nope, now you're 5'10" and a half. So that was the whole premise on I used to be taller. Okay, so these opening statements give the reader an indication what the piece will be about and make them want to keep going to find out more. Tell me if I'm racing, because I have a tendency to do that. But truth alone doesn't really make good humor. Over the years, I've been in workshops where somebody would come in and they read a piece, and people would make suggestions, and we go, but that's not how it really happened. And it's like, well, but if you exaggerate a little bit, it'll be a way funnier piece. So you need to stretch the truth. For instance, this is from a piece I wrote, the beginning of it. Not so long ago, when we went to the movies, I would insist on getting the unlimited refills popcorn. That's the true statement. Which came in a bucket large enough to attempt going over Niagara Falls in, along with a drink the size of 4 human bladders. You've seen these, you know, you get you can see myself. You get the huge popcorn and you get a drink this big around. So anyway, one thing that I want to point out right here is the funniest part of the above statement comes at the end. That's important in humor writing. You always want the humor to come at the end of your sentence or the end of your paragraph. If it doesn't, and you need to add another sentence, break it off and make another paragraph, but get that laugh. The other thing is not to add anything after it. This is another big mistake I see with beginning humor writers, is they want to explain the joke in case somebody's not going to get it. So if I had said, along with a drink the size of 4 human bladders, which meant I had to pee a lot, I've killed the joke. Because the joke was 4 human bladders, you already know that I'm going to have to pee a lot. So anyway, and this photo was from a piece I wrote for an anthology about hot dogs. So I copied them on my scanner and photoshopped myself into them. Another element of humor that is really important, the surprise. If you can lead the reader in one direction and then hit them with something you weren't expecting, you will get a laugh every time. For instance, every month a bunch of us get together for a writer's lunch. Turns out they taste just like chicken. That old play on everything tastes like chicken, but the writer's lunch, you weren't expecting the next line. Here's another one. A new term has entered my everyday vocabulary, age-related. Seems like every time I visit my doctor for a checkup, he says the same old thing. Doc, it hurts when I bend over. Well, that's normal for a guy your age. And I'm really sensitive to cold things. Well, that's normal for a guy your age. And I'm fidgety and I have trouble relaxing. Yes, I noticed that. But if you'll stop complaining for just 1 minute, we'll be done with your proctology exam. So, and this was our Christmas card one year. It says formal, in case people are reading it on their phone, I don't know if they're, it says formal. I thought you said thermal. So this is my wife, and these are our friends. I set up this whole thing. I have my degree is in photography, so there's a lot of photos in here. The last one I think is important is visualization. You have to paint a picture for your reader. You know where you are. You have to write it so the reader is seeing things through your eyes. For instance, over the years, I've learned to avoid hotels with the names of animals in them, like Skunk Creek Inn, Night Frog Motel, and the Aggressive Chipmunk, to name a few. That's why I was a bit nervous as we pulled into the Hungry Pelican Motel. When was the last time the pelicans ate? I asked. So the Hungry Pelican Hotel is a true name. It's located in the Florida Keys, and there are pelicans all over the place. It is a little scary because they're big birds. But the other ones I made up, and I think they're visual. I mean, can you smell the Skunk Creek Inn? You don't want to stay there. Or the Night Frog Motel, you're not going to get any sleep. And you don't even want to picnic at the Aggressive Chipmunk. So these are kind of visualizations. Here's another one, and I think you can kind of relate to this photo. I was deeply involved in the creative process, stretched out in my office chair, eyes closed, head back, mouth open. Some of us have probably ended up like that. When the phone rang, finally, Spielberg has found me, I thought, or maybe it's Lucas. I threw half a can of beer in my face. Ernie Witham, writer at your service, from Santa Barbara to Hollywood, no job too big. It's me, my wife said. What's that dripping sound? You didn't throw beer all over the place again, did you? Okay, so the piece, when it came out, did not have this photo in it, so I had to make it as visual as possible. So, stretched out in a chair with your eyes closed and your head back. It's pretty visual. Okay, so humor is everywhere. You just have to look around. Visualization, all those things, but you have to find something to write about first. And like I said, I was looking every week for something. And when I was writing bi-weekly, I spent every other Sunday afternoon in my office writing a piece. And by the end of Sunday, that's the great thing about having a deadline, for those of you who write for publication, is you have to turn it in. So at the end of Sunday, I had to send it in. They had to have it by Monday morning. So it focused me on writing, but I had to have something to write about. So I read everything. I'm sure a lot of you read a lot of stuff. I used to cut out a lot of things I found in the newspapers and magazines. It's not as easy anymore because, for the most part, newspapers are bad news. And they're getting smaller and smaller, unfortunately, for all of us. But But one day in the local paper, there was an article about a movement in California to make it illegal to call yourself a pet owner. And these people wanted a law that said you could only be known as a pet guardian. And it was partially because, you know, if you're an owner, you feel like you can do anything you want to your pet. But if you're just a guardian, you're taking care of your pet. So it had some logic to it, but I thought it was really funny. And instantly, I pictured myself down on all fours, apologizing to my cat, Sam, for calling myself an owner all those years. And that's all I had was that thought from that piece of paper. I cut it out and I saved it. But then they were going to have to tent our house for termites. And we had to board Sam for a few days at a local vet. Then I really had something to apologize for. So in my piece, I'm actually down on all fours and I'm talking to Sam. He's kind of looking at me funny. I'm batting the ball. He's batting it back. I'm batting the ball. He's batting it back. And then eventually, I have to take him to the vet's office. And the vet would not board him. If anybody has done this, the vet won't board your animal without an exam. And the first thing he asked me was, when the last time we went to the vet, something, I don't know. So then he says, how old was Sam? And I told him, he said, oh, he's a senior cat. And I thought that was funny, senior cat. Instantly, I pictured Sam now receiving AARC magazine, Association for Retired Cats magazine, and wanting to retire in Florida where it's warmer and the mice are slow and everything like that. So all of that came together to make that piece. But all because I found that little thing in the paper. And it was important. I used to do that. I had drawers of stuff I cut out of paper. And at the time, I read about a trend in do-it-yourself restaurants. They're big in the cities, apparently. And we had one nearby in Carpinteria. I don't know if anybody's been there, but we had a steakhouse there where you bought your steak and they handed it to you, and there's a giant grill, and you had to cook your own steak along with all the other people who were cooking steaks, which I thought was ridiculous. I'm not doing that. I can burn a steak at home. I'm not going to burn it, pay you $30 for it, and then burn it. But I remembered it. And I was writing a piece about going out to dinner for a parents' night out. And I wrote, here's a new place in Old Town where you can make your own tacos, mix your own margaritas, and perform your own mariachi music. I wonder how much you should tip yourself in a place like that. So, observation, read everything. Listen for humor. This is a thing that I think a lot of people don't do, but I listen to people all the time. I don't know if you can see this or not, but I'll hold up my. This is really hard. I should have made a slide. Hey, you can't read it. Anyway, it's my business card. And I used to write ad copy to help, supplement my income. And some friends of mine started an agency and they wanted some ad copy, but they said they couldn't afford it. And I said, well, if you'll design some business cards for me, we'll just do a swap, time swap. And they said, great. So they made this business card and it says Ernie Witham writer on it. And it has no dash or comma, just says Ernie Witham writer. And they apologized and said, oh, we can fix that. And I said, no, I want it just like that, Ernie Witham writer. And I had my checks made out at the bank that said Ernie Witham writer. It became the name of my business. So I would go to a store and I would write a check and hand it to the cashier and I'd look at it and he'd say, thank you, Mr. Writer. And I'd laugh every time. I thought, you're welcome, Miss Clerk. Just little things like that. But oftentimes I would engage those counter people in a conversation. I'd say, how was your day? And 9 times out of 10, they'll tell you everything about it. And sometimes it's really funny. So anyway, listen to what's going on. So we're in the Florida Keys. And we were on a boat heading out to a reef to snorkel. And the captain said, be careful of your footing. We've had more accidents this summer from people slipping than from shark bites. I wrote this down. I thought, what? So I used it verbatim. Here we are, the captain informed us after a 45-minute boat ride that reduced the land behind us to a mere memory. Snorkel up and be careful of your footing. We've had more accidents this summer from people slipping than from shark bites. Exactly what he said. How many more, I asked him, but he never answered. He was too busy chumming the water with fish food, pointing out several shiny barracuda, the fish, not the cars that constantly circle that boat. That's all true. He's chumming the water so we'll see the little fish, but there are all these barracuda off in Florida. So we jumped in and the barracuda just sit there and stare at you. It was kind of scary, actually, but it made a good story, and partially because I had that opening line for it. Another time I was with someone who had just recently retired, and I asked what she was doing now. And she said, I've started collecting fruit peels. I have 3 jars full already. And what? I just started laughing. And she went on to explain that she was saving them. She was going to use them, candy them, and she was going to use them in cookies and bread and all that. But it was too late by then. I thought the line was really funny. And so later I used that whole thing because I wrote a piece on getting ready for retirement. This was before I retired, and the things I didn't want to do and the things I thought I did want to do, including hang gliding and cliff climbing and all kinds of stuff, but I did not want to collect fruit peels. But all because I listened. Whoops, sorry. Okay. Observational humor. This is the biggest boon for me, is just seeing what's going on. Today, we all have computers in our pockets. So the minute we stop or nothing's happening, it's so easy to take that cell phone out and check Instagram, check TikTok, check your email, whatever. And I think people are going to end up with iPhone neck, because everybody sits there like this with their neck bent over and holding their phone. And you see, especially teenagers, you see them all the time. When I tell people, don't do that, put the phone away and just watch life go by. And see, I do this all the time. I like to just stand or sit and watch people go by, and I make up little scenarios about them. And I try and guess where they might be from, what they do for a living. One day, I was on State Street in Santa Barbara, the main street, if some of you have been to State Street, and I see this guy walking up, and he's a big guy. He's got a lot of hair and stuff, and he's got his shirt off. He's probably been by the beach. Now he's walking up State Street without his shirt off, and he's got nipple rings, and he's hung his sunglasses from one of the nipple rings. And I went, oh my God, just, I don't know, just made up a whole scenario about this. He had to be from New York, and the woman he was with didn't really like him. I just thought, anyway. So this is a all true statement. So there's a mall in Santa Barbara called El Paseo Mall, and I was shopping with my wife, and she was looking for another pair of black shoes that somehow are going to be different from the black shoes she already had. I got like 2 pairs of shoes. My wife has like 10 pairs of shoes. It's a shoe thing. As a guy, it's tough for me to understand that. But anyway, so I'd had it. So I grabbed the bags from her and I walked over, and there's a circular fountain in the mall. And as I'm walking to it, I looked, and there's all guys sitting around the fountain holding bags. I thought, that's hilarious. We're all just waiting for our wives. And I sat down, and I didn't talk to anybody or anything at that time, but I started thinking, what if we had a conversation? What would we talk about? So later I went to write the piece and I thought, well, we could be talking about sports. And I thought, no, I'm going to flip it. I want to read a little bit of that. I'm ahead of time, right? Okay. I'm read a little bit of that because, oops. Because I want it. This is a technique that I've used a number of times, and I think it really works. If you can't think of where to go with a piece or something that's happened, I like to take the opposite effect a lot. So here's I'm just going to be part of it. While shopping recently, I stopped to rest at my usual spot, a circular fountain in the middle of the mall. All true, as you know. Wiggling in beside an older guy with a pot belly. I placed my backpack beside his small igloo cooler just as a shirtless teenager with death and destruction tattoos and a gold nipple ring walked by, based on that guy I saw. He was closely followed by two young women who hung on his every word, which was mainly the word dude. You've seen this guy, right? And he wore his grungy jeans really low, allowing about 3 inches of his boxer shorts to show. You know, you see these guys all the time like that. So this is where I kind of flip it. Wonder where he got those, the old fellow with the cool ass. They look like silk. Seen him at Nordstrom's, the guy on the other side of me said. He was wearing a very nice polo shirt with subtle light blue highlighting. Last week they had their semi-annual men's personal sale. Shoot, missed that one. I reached into my nylon bag with a double reinforced canvas bottom. Anyone need sunscreen? That DePaba free stuff? Yep, blocks both UVA and UVB rays. With a spritzer, no less. Where'd you find that? Thrifties. No kidding. He leaned over to grab the sunscreen, barely wrinkling his stay-pressed cotton dockers. Say, do you have any of that aloe anti-aging body lotion and skin rejuvenator? Nope. Darn, can't find that anywhere. Have you tried Kmart? The voice came from around the corner of the fountain. I couldn't see his face, but his feet were impressively adorned in a pair of Rockford leather moccasins with rawhide stitching. I heard they just got some wife. A guy from the other side of the fountain yelled, "Hey, how about them Dodgers, huh? Oh, yeah, some big hitting. Yeah, damn straight. What the hell the game that new guy pitched? Oh, hi, dear. Ready?" Okay. Does that make sense? Rather than having typical guys talk about sports, I had us talking about fashion. And then when the wife came, though, we had to be talking about sports. This is a technique I've used a number of times. Oops. Is that technique on that? Yeah, okay. Okay, shopping for humor, right? Obviously, I just talked about shopping, but when I can't find something to write about, I will often just go shopping. My favorite stores are Costco, Home Depot, CVS. I would just wander around. Matter of fact, it's become a thing when we go to Costco. My wife insists that I have my cell phone with me and I have it turned on because she's all done. She's bought everything she wants to buy. She's checking out, and I'm in that huge Costco store. She has no idea where I am. But same with Home Depot. Home Depot's huge. So I was wandering around. I needed a New Year's Day piece. And I'd already written several New Year's Day pieces by now. You know, these things come around. I've written dozens and dozens of every holiday you can imagine. So I was running around looking for stuff. I found something called Gorilla Glue. Thought that was funny. I thought, you know, this is for repairing a gorilla. I wrote it down. Not much. And I went to the appliance section. I was looking at Lazy Susans, and went to the kitchen section, and I was looking at refrigerators and reading the tags. Just nothing was coming together. But, and this is absolutely true, I rounded a corner and there was a platform and there were 5 toilets displayed on the platform. and all different colors and brands. And I looked at those and instantly I thought of the guys at the mall. And I thought, perfect, 5 guys sitting on these toilets because it's the only place to sit down in the store, waiting for their wives. And I had grabbed the latest Home Depot catalog when I walked in the store, so I knew some things to talk about. But some things that were funny, other than just the toilets, was that they were the colors. One was called Rainforest Green. Another was called Loganberry. It was red. And in my story, one guy complained that his wife would never let him get a Loganberry. She'd want to go with beige. So again, I had to flip the guys. Now we're talking about stuff that's in the catalog, and what do you think about this, and what do you think about that? But it's just because I was wandering around and saw those, and the whole story just opened up right there. So shop if you can't find anything else. Oh, and a side note to that, after the story came out, people were actually going to Home Depot to see whether those toilets were really there or whether they made the whole thing up. And they were there for a while until apparently some little kid, didn't know they weren't real and used one of the toilets. And then they had to take the display and put it way up. So anyway, so shopping for humor. All right. So now we've got an idea. We've come up, we've shopped for humor, we've listened for humor, we've got some thread of an idea we want to write about. Now we have to get it started. And getting the reader's attention is the first thing. Some of you obviously have been writing for magazines. I don't know about newspapers, but you know, people thumb through and they don't read everything. They're looking for something that interests them. And so as a writer, your job is to stop them. And the first thing you can do, especially writing humor, is have a humorous title. And so these are a few of the ones that I have used over the years. And I apologize for using only examples of my own writing, but I've tried using other people's, but I always felt weird about it because I don't really know what their thinking was. I know what my thinking was. So I like to just reference my stuff that way. If I badmouth myself, nobody's gonna get mad at me. So here's a few. New Hampshire, land of the tree, home of the rake. Obviously a play on land of the free, home of the brave. It's okay to use puns in titles. Matter of fact, a lot of titles you'll read are punny. Using puns in your piece itself is dicey. You know, too many of them become real grown. Or I use one once in a while maybe, but I try and avoid them. Which came first? Bowling of the six-pack, chicken or the egg? I have the chicken and the egg. Summertime and your luggage is missing. And the never ever rules of health club membership, which talked about all the things you shouldn't do at the health club. Oh, and these billboards, I guess you can see these. There's only one billboard there, but I looked at it and I thought, wow, I could Photoshop myself onto that billboard. It'd be kind of fun. So my wife took a photo of it, and then I made the first one and then duplicated it. So the whole series of them. Anyway, I spend a lot of time. I waste a lot of time doing Photoshop stuff. Okay, so now we have the reader has stopped. They've read our title. They think it's funny. They want to see what this is all about. We've got to come up with the first paragraph. Crucial. It's got to be funny. It's got to, if it's not funny, they're turning the page. So there's a couple examples. I want to talk about the first one, though, how it came to be, which is Botox. Writing about Botox from the guy's point of view was kind of a different take right away. But the way it happened was because I listened. I had a friend, he's passed on now, but he's a screenwriter. He wrote for television. He had like 18 or 19 TV of the week movies produced. He was a producer and a writer, and great guy. And we were talking one day, and Botox had just come out, and he said, directors are going nuts because of Botox. All the young starlets are injecting them foreheads to get rid of the wrinkles, and now nobody can frown. So when there's a serious scene in the movie and the director goes, okay, look serious, they can't. There's no, I thought it was hilarious. So that's in the piece later on. But when I wanted to get it started, I thought about Botox, and I came up with this paragraph. To wrinkle or not to wrinkle, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous frowning, or to bear Botox against the forehead of troubles, and by injecting, end them. A play on, obviously, Shakespeare. And my publisher added the Shakespeare as channeled to Ernie Witham, 2003, in parentheses after it. So, here's another example. Because getting that first sentence is one of the hardest parts sometimes. I will write sometimes 3 or 4 sentences, or sometimes I'll be halfway through my piece and go, I know how it starts now. And now we'll go back and make a new beginning, because you gotta get that first laugh. So the second one is I got the flu, and I got it in August, and it was miserable. But even as sick as I was, I thought while I was being sick that I was going to write about this afterwards, and I did. But so this is the first paragraph, called it Singing the Flu Blues. The chill is gone, baby, the chill is gone, B.B. King ripoff. Unfortunately, that means I now have fever in the morning, fever all through the night. That ends the musical portion of today's column. Now for the question of the day. Why do I have the flu in the middle of summer? January, okay. February, who cares? But August, come on. So I had people interested by then, and they wanted to read about how I got the flu and what I did about it. So when I went to write the piece, I needed some product stuff. So I went to CVS, and I wandered up and down the aisles, and I picked up products, and I wrote down the names. This is a long time ago, before cell phones. I wrote down the names of stuff. I turned them over and see what kind of ingredients they had, of manufacturer's warnings. I wrote some of that down. I do this all the time. Nobody ever bothers me. Once in a while, somebody will come up and say, can I help you? And I'll say, I'm not just looking. They'll go, oh, okay. Well, if you need any help, just let me know. And I'll go, okay. And I'll just keep writing stuff down. Yeah. Anyway, so beginnings. The other thing that is important for a piece, I think, is a high recognition factor. The more the reader can relate to what you're writing about, the more they're going to want to read it. So, in women's magazines, of course, all the articles are geared toward women, so they're all going to have an interest to them. But in a general publication, people are looking for something they want to read. And so if it's something they know something about, or they've had in the past, or they're going to do in the future, they might stop and read it. So these are a few of the things I've written about. Shopping for a new car, going to Home Depot, the hacker's version of golf, family day, helping my wife around the house, which never quite works out, anniversaries, birthdays, every holiday you can imagine, the difference between men and women, trying to find flowers at the last minute on Valentine's Day, and getting older. These are just a few of the things I've written about, but they all have kind of a universality to them. Oops. Too fast to the trigger. Okay, now for a couple techniques I've picked up over the years. There's a thing called the rule of threes. And you probably do it in your writing and you're not even aware you're doing it, but stand-up comedians do it all the time. It's kind of a rhythm thing. It's kind of like bada bing, bada boom. Funny, funny, funnier. Funny, funny, funniest. Or not so funny, kind of funny, funny. It's a rhythm. Bang, bang, bang. So things work really well in threes. Here's a couple examples. Just once I'd like to see something for free that I really want, like free HBO for life, or free Harley Davidson to a good family, or free beer all day with free bar food served by Playboy models. 1, 2, 3. Guess what, my wife said? Today is free electric guitar lessons? No, it's free. All you can eat chicken wings? No, it's free. Amusement park admission? No, even better than all those things, it's free museum day. Okay, so again, three things. And another technique that comes in this piece is repeating things. Sometimes things can be funny if you just go back to them. Like the next part of the story was, this is the point in a relation after she tells me it's free museum day, which means I'm going to be spending all day in museums. This is the point in a relationship where an immediate reaction can make or break the moment, or in our case, mess up our final day of our France vacation. Wow, I said, that's great. Wow. I must have pulled it off because my wife grabbed her Marseille guidebook and said, we can't do them all, unfortunately, but I'll bet we can do 6 or 8, maybe even 10. Wow, I said, that's great. Wow. Anyway, there's rules of 3. And you'll see that I'm going to read some stuff. You'll recognize it right away. Another technique I've kind of already talked about this with the mall piece and the Home Depot piece, but opposites work really well. These are my friends, Kate and Max. We used to kid sit for these two. They're my wife's niece's children. And they were kind of our practice grandchildren. We used to babysit, kids sit them all the time. And we went to the pumpkin patch. And we're taking the hay rides and listening to the talking pumpkin and looking at the pumpkins and all that other stuff. And I was trying to think how I was going to write a piece. I knew I was going to write a piece because I had a piece due within a couple of days. And so I was trying to get him to say funny things and stuff. And then all of a sudden I realized, what if I'm the big kid and they're the ones who have to tell me things like the scarecrow can't really talk, Ernie. Really? Oh, come on. No, it can't, so I flipped it and had them talking. And I know kids always want the biggest pumpkin they can get, and you have to end up carrying it. So I thought that would be funny if I flipped that and I get the biggest pumpkin. And Max over here has got this little tiny pumpkin, and Kate has just got her hand on her head. So I posed these guys. They were such great kids. So I posed them for this photo, even before I wrote the piece, because I knew I was going to write it. And just for an update, Max is now 22, I think. He's getting married in May. And Kate is like 24, and she's going to have a baby in May. So that's how old this piece is. All right. Here's another opposite story. And that's jury duty. I'm sure a lot of you have probably gotten jury duty. And what's the first thing you do when you head into the jury room is you're trying to figure out, how am I going to get out of this? I'm not, everybody wants to get out of it. They want to come up with an excuse. And you used to be able to. Now it's really hard to get out of it. But so when I went to write it, I thought, I read it exactly the opposite, that I'm all excited. I got this summons and I'm really excited to go and serve on the jury. So there's a lot of truth in this piece, because when I was sitting there in a courtroom, hoping in real life they wouldn't call me, I took out a notebook and I wrote down everything that was happening, from the questions being asked of potential jurors to the judge's response, to the fact they were going to pay me $5 a day and mileage one way. Now it's $15 a day. I just served recently. Now it's $15 a day. But they only pay you mileage one way. So I figured they got to pay you to get there, or you're not going to come, but they don't have to pay you to go home because you're going to go home anyway. I don't know. Logic. And I knew I was going to use that $5 thing. In my piece, I said I was elated about the $5 because that's twice what I was making as a writer. So in reality, I actually got called to the jury box. And one of the questions the judge asked, which he really did, is there anyone who has worked in law enforcement or had any confrontations with law enforcement? In real life, I'm sitting on the jury, I said no. And that was it. But in my story, I changed it. Look. It's here somewhere. Okay. I just want to read a small section about when he asked if anybody had worked in law enforcement or had any confrontations with law enforcement. This is where a lot of people were trying to get out of jury duty. They were going, yes, my brother-in-law got arrested for DUI. And the judge would say, I'm not worried about that. And somebody else would say that everybody's trying to use that particular thing to get out of jury duty. So when he said that, in my story, I raised my hand. And this is exactly what he said. He said, now, before we begin, is there anyone here today who has worked in law enforcement or has any confrontations with law enforcement? That's something I had written down. I raised my hand. Mr. Witham? I used to be a crossing guard at Harvard Street Elementary School. Thank you, Mr. Witham. I should also mention that I recently had a run-in with an usher who caught me bringing in my own popcorn. Thank you, Mr. Witham. And then there was that ugly incident with a museum tour guide, like something that old wouldn't have broken soon anyway. Thank you, Mr. Witham. She sure could run fast, though, for a woman wearing high heels. Mr. Witham, yes? Have you ever served on a jury before? Well, I've been called a number of times, and I usually get this far, but for some reason, I never get to stay. That I believe, Mr. Witham. You are dismissed. So, anyway, that's opposites. I hope you'll try some of these techniques when you're thinking about writing. Okay, how are we doing on time? Oh, we're doing good. When you first start writing, people say, write what you know. You can't think of what, say, I don't know what to write about. They say, write what you know. You're a gardener, write about gardening. If you're a bird watcher, write about bird watching. You collect ceramics, write about ceramics. And that's okay, I've done that, but I think it's far more interesting to write about something I don't know anything about, because it's all new. So I suggest to people to take a class, or go to a new event, or travel, or try a new sport, anything. Try anything you do is different. It's going to have a whole bunch of different stuff involved, and you can just see the humor in it. Like the first time I golfed, I didn't golf as a young person, but when my son was 16 years old, he said, let's golf, let's go golfing. I said, I don't know, it's kind of old guys. And he said, you're an old guy, let's go golfing. So we tried it, and I thought it was ridiculous. I mean, you lift the club, you twist your body, you bend your knees, and you got to try and get back to where the ball was and hit the thing straight without falling over. But it was easy to write about because of all these things were. So, and I've written a bunch of golf pieces. Somebody mentioned Jack Canfield earlier, I think, and I've written for 20 plus chicken soup books. I love those chicken soup books. Jack Canfield's a friend of mine who've met him a number of times at writers' conferences and stuff. But the first book I was in was Chicken Soup for the Golfer. So I had 3 pieces in that first book. Then I've written, beginner's guide to golf, about golf balls, all kinds of stuff. So later, I'd written all the basic ones, and I wanted to write another golf piece. And 4 of us were all about the same age, and we're driving to a golf course, which is out of Santa Barbara a little ways in the valley. And when we're driving, we're setting up our excuses. If anybody's a golfer, you make up your excuses why you're not going to do well that day, so that you can say, "I told you, my hip was bothering me." So one of the guys said, "This part's all true." He says, "I used to have back problems." He said, "Now I have golfer's elbow." And one of the other guys said, "I've got golfer's elbow and tennis elbow in both arms. I have to take a leave before I can play." And this comment produced a course. It sounded like a commercial. "I take a leave, I take a leave, I take a leave." That was all true. We all said that. And I remembered it. I couldn't write it down because we're driving, but I remembered that. And when I went to write the column, I titled it, "This column brought to you by a leave." And after it came out online, I got an email from an agency in New York, and they said they enjoyed my piece and they appreciated the mention and they'd like to send me some free product. And I thought, I don't know about that, but all their information was in the email, and I thought, well, okay. So I sent them my address, and the next day they sent me, you can see in the photo, 500 Aleve tablets, which is way more than the column paid from the publisher. So you never know. After that, I thought, wow, I'm going to write about Harley Davidsons. I'm going to write about airline tickets, and that hasn't panned out. Okay, another example, because I think this is an important part, is trying something different with any kind of writing. If you're working on a novel, for instance, and you need to set a scene somewhere, the easiest way to set it is to go wherever you want that scene to be set and just kind of sit there and look around and observe everything. So when you go to write the scene, what's there and what people are doing and how people are reacting and things like that. So somebody that write for magazines know that it's different than newspapers. You have to write way ahead. I was writing for Chicken Soup magazine, which was a bi-monthly, 6 times a year. So one year I had to write a Christmas piece in August, which was really depressing. But then in April one year, they wanted a back to school piece, and I'd already written one the previous year, back to school piece. So I needed something different. And I said, how about I take an adult ed class and it doesn't work out? They knew it was going to be a humor piece. And they said, great, go with that. We need it by Monday. So the class started on Saturday. It was called The Art of Bonsai. And it was a 5 Saturday class, but I only had time to go to one class before I had to write my piece. But it was all so different. I had no problem finding things I thought were funny. On the first day, the instructor gave us a little juniper bush in a bucket and some tools, and she told us about shaping a tree and wiring the branches and doing all this stuff. And one thing she said was, if you have one bonsai and it dies, you've lost your whole collection. But if you have 10 and one dies, you still have 9 trees. I thought this was hilarious. I wasn't going to have 10 trees. So I wrote it down. And then I noticed about half the class were people who had older trees and already in pots, and they were working on them. And so I walked around and I asked them how long they've been doing this. They were like, oh, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. And it reminded me of guys in the prison yard. How long you in for? I'm in for 10, I'm in for 15. So I thought that was funny. I wrote that down. And then, oh, another thing, we're working on long tables. Everybody had their trees sitting on the table, and we had to go up and get tools and wire from the front of the room. Somebody bumped the table on the way back, and everybody's plant jiggled. And it was audible gasp, you know. And to me, it was just hilarious, the whole thing. And I, you know, when I went at my tree, I just started trimming because I only had one day. And I thought, I'm just gonna go for it. So I was like Edward Scissorhands going at the thing. So anyway, I wrote the next day, I wrote the whole piece and sent it in on Monday, and it got published. And but I meant to mention this earlier, but I see I've written it down here so I wouldn't forget, but I write mainly self-deprecating humor. I make myself the fall guy. I don't like to insult anybody. Sometimes I insult somebody that is a kind of a nondescript person, somebody in the bus driver or somebody like that, but not anybody I know. So when this thing came out, I showed the lady who was leading the class, and she thought it was really funny. So I didn't make an enemy of her. She's my friend. Still to this day, she's my friend. But a funny aside to this story is that I now have 60 or more bonsai trees. It's taken over my life. I've been doing it now for almost 20 years. So after that first Saturday when I wrote my story, I thought, well, I got to go back and finish my tree. And I went back for the whole 5 weeks. And then she taught it twice a year. And I went back in the spring and took another 5 weeks. In the fall, took another 5 weeks, and I went 3 or 4 years. Then I joined the club, and now I do bonsai all the time. So you never know what happens if you try new things. Oops. Okay, another thing. This comes up for me all the time because I've written so many pieces, and I have to be careful not to fall into the rut of writing the same piece over and over and over. So I'm always trying to think of a different approach. And sometimes you get a thread of an idea. You know, the same thing when you're writing for magazines or something. You've got the thread of an idea, but you have to build it, make it work. And especially in a novel, if you're setting a scene, you have to get that whole scene working and make it work into the next scene. So you have to flesh it out. So I have a friend who's a house painter. He's also a humor writer. He's the one who got me the position at Montecito Journal. He was writing for them at the same time. And he introduced me to the publisher. So one time in a group lunch, somebody asked if he could repaint their living room wall. They've taken a class in faux finishing. I don't know if any of you have done this. And she sponged her wall. And she loved it until she didn't love it. And then she wanted it back to normal. So she asked Jim, the painter, if he could paint it for her. And he just threw out a line, because he's just such a funny guy. And he said, faux finishing is the best thing that's ever happened to my painting business. Because he got called all the time to repaint people's walls. But almost instantly somebody said, well, there's your column right there. No, that was one sentence. Jim has since written a whole book about his painting experience called Paint Chips. So this happens, you know, an idea peters out after a few paragraphs. And you have to figure out how you're going to make it work. Like I was in my office trying to write a piece, and it was Sunday. So I had my little TV on, and I was watching the football game. And my wife came out and said, "How's it going?" I said, "Not really going very well." And she said, "Well, we need a new car." She said, "Let's go car shopping." And I don't know, I don't know about you, but I hate car shopping. You go to the lot, and, you got to deal with all those people there. The whole goal is to sell your car right then and there. They don't want you leaving the lot unless you buy that car. So, but I started thinking of how similar it could be between football and car shopping. And I played that around my mind when we went to the thing. I went to the car lot thinking that, and then I'm going to read a little bit of this piece so I can show you how this works, because so we're going to go. My wife wants to go to the car dealership, and so I'm getting ready. I got a towel around my neck, and he says, "What's wrong with your mouth?" "Nothing," I said, spitting out my mouth guard. "Have you seen my athletic cup?" I always give my wife some funny lines. "Sorry, I thought it was a soap dish, except it was too small to hold a full bar of Dove, so I threw it out." "That's funny." Here comes the football stuff. "That's funny. Try to keep your sense of humor when you're staring down the throat of a 250-pound second-year salesman out of UCLA who hasn't made a sale all day." We circled a lot. The opposing team was nowhere in sight. Maybe we could get in and out without too much contact. We pulled in and parked. I left it running with the doors open. "Okay, let's huddle." My wife threw her arms around me and her voice got a little husky. "Huddle, not cuddle. We need a game plan, or we're going to end up spending the next 5 seasons in a used Peugeot with manual windows and an AM radio." My wife nodded, finally grasping the seriousness of our situation. We were the underdogs. Seldom had a husband and wife team built the sales dogs on their own turf, especially on playoff Sunday. Anyway, so that's kind of how I pieced it together. It's combining football and car shopping. And I've done this a number of times. Okay, so there's another thing. Okay, another thing that, again, you guys probably already do this, but in workshops I've been in, people will come in and start reading something, and it's in a humor workshop, and they'll read in about a page in, maybe they'll say something funny, and everybody in the class says, "Oh, that's where it starts, right there." And they don't want to throw away that first 250 words because it took so long to write it, but you got to get that funny up front. So oftentimes you can start with something later in the story that's funny, and then you can tell people where you are and what you're doing. Here's an example. I titled this Pat Ernie's Wild Ride, and you'll see why in a minute. And this, you can relate to this if you use GPS and it's gotten lost. Proceed to the route, proceed to the route, proceed to the route. All true. I took out my gun and I shot Siri. Exaggeration. Actually, it's against the rental car's policy to shoot holes in the dashboard, my wife informed me. According to page 15 of the rental form, they charge extra for that. Told you I give my wife funny lines. I looked at the GPS map on the screen. It was turning 180 degrees to the left, then 180 degrees to the right, then left, then right. Proceed to the route, proceed to the route. How much extra, I said. Then I tell you where we are. Pat and I were in Portland, Oregon. It was April 11th. Much to the elation of local weather forecasters, it had snowed during the night and early morning hours. First time in 80 years of record keeping. One for the books. Never seen anything like it. I heard that one guy even crooned, "I'm dreaming of a white April." Okay, that's the exaggeration part. But all of that part was true. We had a rental car and we looked out the next morning and it's completely covered in snow. It's not a 4-wheel drive, it's just a little sedan. And the reason we were in Portland is because my stepson and family were living there. And so we had a house we were staying in, but it was a opposite side of Portland from them. So we had to drive to go see them. And a lot of roads were closed. They don't have any plowing equipment there. They didn't, it was a mess. And coming back, we turned down a road and we actually got deeper and deeper into snow, and GPS was totally lost. It was dark. We couldn't see where we were. And so all of that, and the really Siri was kept saying, proceed to the route, proceed to the route, proceed to the route. So I thought that was the funniest part, so I brought it to the front. Okay. Now we did. Oh, good. We make it. Okay, so I'd like to talk about writing for the holidays a little bit, because that was one of the things that was in my opening thing. And originally this was going to be Valentine's Day that I was talking, but funny thing, it wasn't funny at the time, but the wind blew out our internet and I had to call Jackie and say, help, I can't connect. So that's why I'm doing it now. But so anyway, this is also part of the marketing thing. People often want to ask me how they can get started writing for newspapers, or writing or publishing humor, writing and publishing humor. And I tell them that one way, it's a good way to start, is writing for the holidays, because newspapers have no staffs now. Even years ago, they didn't have much of a staff. So if you could write a funny piece of the right length, I should probably mention length. My humor column is 700 to 725 words. Some magazines are 500 words. So you have to write to that word count, or they're going to cut you where you don't want to be cut. So you learn to write to that length. But so I suggest writing holiday pieces. If you send in a holiday piece that's funny to the editor, and in enough time, I've found if you send it in too soon, they lose it. If you send it in too late, they can't get it in. So maybe a month before the holiday turned out to be a good time. I think I mentioned earlier, my first piece as a column was a Father's Day piece, and it ran, and because I ran my photo with it, a lot of people noticed it. And immediately after, I contacted that publisher, editor, I think I mentioned this already, and I said, can I write another piece? I wrote a Halloween, Christmas, Valentine's Day piece, and they didn't pay anything because it was in the editorial section, but I didn't care. I was getting some great clips, and they all ran with my photo, so I was getting more and more readership, and I had more and more clips to send out to other people. So, but anyway, the Valentine's Day piece I was going to talk about on Valentine's Day is one I wrote about Victoria's Secret. So I knew this was on my first, I think was my first Valentine's Day piece. And I thought, how funny to write about Victoria's Secret, because guys go there on Valentine's Day and trying to find something for their wives. And it's really embarrassing. You don't want to touch anything. You constantly feel like this because you're out of your element as a guy to be in a lingerie place. So, but I did. A month before, I went to Victoria's Secret in the mall, and I was the only guy in there. And I didn't take notes because I thought that would be really weird if there's somebody walking around taking notes. But I looked around and I could see how things were laid out, and I could see the names of stuff. And one other thing I noticed I thought was funny was all the young ladies working in there had a little tag advertising whatever was on special. I remembered that. And so when I went to write it, I pictured, again, a bunch of guys there on Valentine's Day trying to find something for their wives. So this has a whole beginning. I'm going to skip the beginning because I just want to do the part about the lingerie store. I headed across the mall to the lingerie store. The place was mobbed with guys all holding intimate apparel, trying to picture their wives in them. This is kind of true. They're, you're holding it up and you're going, I don't know. And sizes. What do we know about women's sizes? One guy was holding his selection upside down, wondering, I suspect, why the thing had snaps at the neck. I was about to explain when a sales lady approached wearing a button that said, "All our bras are half off." So I'm going to stop just for a minute and say, anytime you get a sign or a button or the side of a truck or something in your story, you can put anything you want on there and make it funny. So that's what I did. All our bras are half off. She looked frazzled. Her hair was mussed. Her makeup was smeared, and she had bags under her eyes. There's the visual. "Let me guess," she said. "Gift for the wife?" Before I could compliment her on her quick assessment of the situation, she moved me to one side and yelled over my shoulder, "Please don't mix the satin panties up with the silk ones." There were two different things. I had noticed that. Two guys were each holding a dozen pair of panties, smiling sheepishly like they just got caught during a midnight raid in the female dorms. "I hate Valentine's Day," she muttered. Then with a forced smile, she asked, "So what did you have in mind?" "I don't know, something sexy, I guess." "Novel idea. What's her favorite color?" "Brown?" Brown's her favorite color? Green? You don't know, do you?" So I'm making all this conversation up. She never said this stuff, but "Well, our cat is gray, and my wife really likes the cat." "Sir," she shoved me aside again. "Sir." A large bald man in a three-piece suit glanced up. "It's Velcro," she said. "As you have no doubt observed, it'll make that same sound over and over." She shook her head, turned her attention back to me, and was about to speak when a tall, thin guy approached us wearing a teddy over his t-shirt and boxer shorts. "What do you think?" he asked. I thought the red was a little too bright for his complexion, and I was about to say so when the sales lady jumped up onto our clearance counter and addressed the entire store. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. I want every one of you to take out the amount of money you want to spend and step up to the counter. I will hand you an item that costs that amount of money. Do not worry about the colors or the size. Your wives will be here to exchange your gifts tomorrow. Now, who's first?" Okay, so that was a really fun piece to write, but I had to go to that store and see how it was laid out. Kind of shopping for humor again. Okay, one more piece and then I'm done. Or should we take questions? Do you want to stop and take questions? No? Okay. A Christmas piece. Oh, Secret Santas. Sorry. Okay. So I have written, like I said, dozens of holiday pieces. I've written, one year I sat down and made a list of everything I could think about for Christmas, because I knew I was going to have to write a Christmas piece every year. So I wrote about I wrote down Christmas trees, shopping for the wife, putting on ornaments, going to the snow, everything I could think of. Secret Santas, and the Christmas letter. Every year, my wife's friend from college would send us this Christmas letter, and it always, you've gotten these, and it tells you all the stuff they've done for the whole year. Boy was an Eagle Scout, the dad had gotten some award, the daughter had done this, and they were in a pageant, and it just went on and on and on and on. And we used to laugh at it every year because it was so kind of over the top. So I decided to spoof it, and I wrote this letter. Dear family and friends, season's greetings. I should start out by saying that the unsightly rash I told you about recently has finally cleared up, so as have the painful swelling and itching. Come to find out, it had nothing to do with living near the landfill, but instead, and you'll laugh at this, it turned out to be a simple case of impetigo. Hope you enjoy the box of jalapeno cheese balls. I made them with my own little hands. Note, discontinue use at first sign of inflammation. Financially, things are looking up as we head into the new year. I just got an increase in my disability check. Plus, the wife's herb garden is starting to bring in some real money now that she found an herb that young people like. And I can't say as I blame them. We tried a little on a tuna casserole and ended up eating the whole thing in one sitting. Believe it or not, we were lucky enough to spend 4 days in Bakersfield, California in August during the annual Topsoil Fair and Expo, and witness firsthand the crowning of Mr. Fertilizer and Miss Pesticide. Vacations don't get much better than that, huh? Children are all doing well. The oldest has been named head cook at the corrections center, a position he'll have for at least the next 6 months to a year. He sends his love and has included the state recipe for Tuesday's surprise. He also wanted us to tell you that he's getting the family tree tattooed on his buttocks by a female guard named Dolores, who's working her way through art school. He'll send color photos as soon as all your names are in place. Well, I guess that's it for about now. I guess that's about all for now. Oh yeah, almost forgot. I'm supposed to remind anyone passing through town that we have plenty of space in the travel trailer now that the goat has died. So be sure and call for directions when you get here. Hope the year has been good as you, it has been as good to you as it has to us. Salutations. Anyway, so that's as much as I have prepared.